To this story now, Cabinet has approved the white paper on the National Labour Migration Policy for implementation, paving the way for tighter regulations of foreign nationals employed in key sectors of the economy. This was announced by the Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who said that the policy will address job expectations amid rising unemployment levels in the country. We are now joined by the chairperson of the African Diaspora Network, Dr Vusumuzi Sibanda. Dr. Sibanda, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Your reaction to the government now forging ahead with the National Labour Migration Policy?
Good morning, Adrian. Good morning to the to the viewers and listeners. Well, look, it is to be expected, especially under the circumstances, considering the levels of unemployment that the country has seen. But you would have also noticed that we've seen this move taking place in quite a number of countries. It's not South Africa that, for example, would be the first to come up with a labour migration policy that tries, to minimize and have quotas, especially as far as, migrant workers are concerned. We see actually some that are taking extreme stance like what we're seeing, happening in America now. So, yes, it is something that will have repercussions. And those repercussions, as you would have remembered what the minister said when he came in, the Minister of Home Affairs, when he was talking about the need to ensure that, there is a better way of attracting and expediting, the employment of scarce skills that are required. So there is a need for, specialized skills, that migrants, would obviously be bringing in. But obviously that would have to be, integrated properly, with this migration policy to ensure that the country does not suffer in the long run.
Yeah. What do you think some of the ripple effects of this decision could be? You speak about the repercussions. What are some of those?
Some of the repercussions, obviously, are likely, the tighter regulations, if not properly implemented, and like what we have seen already, with the level of delays in processing of visas and so forth, we have seen already a lot of away from South Africa because, the Department of Home Affairs has not been, acting within, the expected timeframes to deal with, migrants that are coming in or specialized skills or those that have been admitted for purposes of investment and so forth. So now, with this migration policy, we can see people that are over-enthusiastic, like what we've seen people like the Minister of Sports and Culture, Mr. Gayton McKenzie, using this, particular, or this particular policy to try and grow their own theories about the right wing state, or for example the hatred of migrants. So this could obviously lead to a situation where the pace in processing some of these visas could even be worse, become much slower, and the attitude towards the migrant communities, particularly those that are required by the country in specialized skills. For example, in sports, if you look at, the amount of sporting people that are invited into the country. So you might have an environment that becomes relatively more hostile toward migrants. And at the end of the day, that means that the country will not be able to attract, the required skills.
Yeah, I think the other thing about South Africa is something quite unique. If you take into consideration, for instance, when the minister then of Labour made the announcement of this policy and the introduction of this policy, quoted in his introduction that in 2015, South Africa had become the largest host of international migrants in Africa and was hosting around 3.1 million of them against the 2.1 million for Côte d'Ivoire. But in South Africa, the big conversation is more around undocumented foreign nationals and what policy already says around undocumented foreign nationals, that you're not allowed to employ them as an example. They must be documented. And I don't know whether this actually does speak to that, because this NLMB speaks about quotas on the total number of documented foreign nationals.
Indeed. You see, the issue that now we are looking at is basically that, and this is what is supposed ordinarily to be controlled, that is these quotas, as you'd have seen, that a lot of countries do practice, these quotas. But if you look at developed countries, you see the trend is basically that this has obviously, slowed down because there is a need, for labor and specialized, even general workers. But now, if you look at a country like South Africa that is still quite developing, you'll realize that there is high levels of unemployment, and this necessitates these quotas for documented, migrants. And unfortunately, with South Africa is a country that has got a huge problem of undocumented, migrants or irregular migrants that need to be regularized, and that are a problem because even employers tend to exploit, these people, despite some of the regulations and policies that have been put in place, like, by, for example, the Basic Employment Act or Specialized, Services Act, which looks at the fact that if you do employ somebody that is undocumented and, you decide that you want to fire them or something happens and they take you to the CCMA, you'd still be charged and made, to pay all the outstanding salaries, that you cannot kick people out because that had been, a leeway, for people to abuse, the irregular, migrants. So while South Africa has got a bigger problem that is juxtaposed with undocumented or irregular migrants that are seen to be competing with, ordinary South Africans, especially on the general, labor market, it still has got a huge need for specialized skill, which comes in for documented, migrants. So if, for example, the quota comes in and says you can only employ, 5,000 people or in a year, for example, in IT, and yet IT, for example, has got a huge need for these specialized or critical skills, maybe 20,000. That means that South Africa, at the end of the day, will have a deficit of 15,000, which it might have to make up by trying to train. But how long does training take? So this, particular quotas, issue is something that needs to be considered very, very carefully, because it's not about just coming up with a policy that is informed by, sentimentalism or trying to address the issues of unemployment without looking at the real repercussions, because the critical skills list that has been long, published and that is revised year after year shows that there is a great need for specialized skill, and still there is a shortage because of these delays. That is why the Department of Home Affairs has come up with a trusted employer scheme to try and expedite this particular process, because companies are always suffering at the end of the day because these skills are not found in good time. So that becomes an issue.
Finally, in conclusion, is this an admission from the state and perhaps maybe organizations like yourself that indeed that there has been competition for a limited number of jobs in South Africa among South Africans as well as foreign nationals, whether documented or undocumented?
Well, look, it's not that there isn't, that's not a reality that, resources are always competed for, because even the xenophobic attacks that we've seen, they are born out of the fact that, a huge group of people is fighting over limited resources. But now this fight over limited resources obviously is a result of the failure, of the economy to be stimulated enough to produce, required jobs. But on the same note, there is a need for these, critical skills, because there is a huge shortage, because, the education, the training sectors are not responsive enough to that. So to a huge extent, like any other country, there is competition, but in this particular case, especially when you look at critical skills, there is a huge shortage that needs to be addressed. But now it is actually how you juxtapose and you deal with these particular issues to address and bring, that equilibrium to ensure that, one, you are able to continue to produce and meet the required, service providers that are specialized, that the country really needs.
Thank you so much for your time. That's the chairperson of the African Diaspora Network, Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda.